It's time for a Senior Citizens Forum. I'm Janice Wood, your host, and a Senior Citizens Forum is being presented by Benefits for You 2 Insurance Services, where we specialize in Medicare supplemental plans, Medicare Advantage plans, and prescription drug plans. Medicare insurance plans are for people that are 65 of age and older, and for some younger people under the age of 65 who have qualifying disabilities. Did you know that 1 in 10 people getting divorced today are over the age of 65?
Doesn't surprise me.
It surprised you?
Yeah.
Okay. But I'm here with my special guest, Kathy Neumann, who has her offices in Westlake Village and Sherman Oaks, California. She's been a family law attorney for, well, how many years? I was saying
27 years.
27 years. I've known Kathy for 13 years now.
Yes.
We have a very special relationship.
Yes.
I happen to be married to her ex-husband.
Yes.
They share 2 beautiful daughters.
Thank you.
And they also share, and I'm so fortunate to be sharing, 5 delicious, adorable, hugging grandsons. And I'm so honored that I have this privilege to be with Kathy. And what I really appreciate about all this, when I tell people I'm doing things with my husband's ex-wife, they're going, what? And I'm going, it doesn't matter to me. I don't care. I had nothing to do with their divorce.
That's
okay?
right. That's right.
So what do I care? Okay? I just honored to be part of their family. But she's a family law attorney. And in reading her bio, she had something in there that said family matters.
Yes.
And she lives the family matters.
Yes.
So when she's a family law attorney, she actually knows what it's like.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. And I know I've been divorced a couple times. And divorce, no matter at what age, can be extremely traumatic. If you're 65 and above, it's just as traumatic. And I would say, as an adult, and this is something Kathy probably doesn't know about me, my parents got divorced after 33 years of marriage. My brother and I were both out of the house. My brother was married. I had a baby, and my mother was so shocked when my father picked up and left. And it affects the whole family. Now, my brother and I weren't shocked that this was happening, but she was shocked. And not only was it a change in her life and my father's life, it was a change in my brother and our life. Not only was it financially a hardship, it was an emotional hardship. And for my mother, because of the time we're talking about, it was an embarrassment. So, Kathy, do you deal with a lot of people that are 65 and older that are getting divorced?
Yes, I do. I actually have a lot of clients and have had a lot of clients who have been married a very long time. Some people maybe not as long a time because maybe it's their second marriage, but they're still either in retirement or almost at retirement. And a lot of people who have been maybe more happily married for a longer time, and I've had people say this to me, why did they get divorced after all those years? Well, there's as many reasons as there are people. And, you know, sometimes one partner, one spouse finds somebody else or realizes that they're lonely because they don't share activities or interests with their spouse, or they don't even really like their spouse.
Yeah.
That happens a lot where people people may watch TV in different rooms and watch, you know, different types of movies, and they could still like each other, but some people don't. And some people feel lonelier sitting next to their spouse than they do alone. And so, and there's other reasons too. I actually did a legal separation for a couple who, he was a spendthrift and she was frugal, and she didn't want to feel angry every time he spent money. And so we did a legal separation. They're still legally married. The status of their marriage stayed intact, but they have separate financial, completely financial, independent financial dealings. They have their own accounts, and one is not entitled to any part of the others. And so there's, like I said, there are so many reasons why people get divorced. Some are nice to each other, some are not. As Janice said, I do believe that family matters. And so I try to keep people from being their worst selves. I try to help them see that there's another way other than being angry and hurtful. And especially when people are older, usually, or often, but I will say this, usually, they do have a family together. And so, as Janice also said, the relationship with the family, even when their children are older, is impacted. Whether you have holidays together, whether you see each other at events where your children are involved, your adult children or your grandchildren.
It's hard. I mean, you have friends together.
Yes.
Family as an adult child, and having to go through that all of a sudden, oh my God, I can't have my father over here because my mother was here. I mean, I can remember having a knee surgery, and we're talking 45 years ago, and waking up and seeing my mother and father in the same room, and they hadn't seen each other before, and it was like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And I couldn't tell one to stay away over the other.
No, and if they're being cordial, great,
Yeah.
so much the better. Because even when you get divorced, if you have children, you're always going to be family.
I like the way you put it, you're always tied.
I do kind of have this catchphrase where when you have kids, you are always joined at the kid forever. Not just until they turn 18, not just until they move out, forever. Because of these events that we're talking about, whether there's a surgery or a happy event or a sad event, you're always going to be together, connected through your child or children.
There are always those ties, and there's always that history that you had together.
Well, that can bring people together and closer and bonded. And it can also be wrenching because who gets the photographs? And, you know, people who are older may actually have the photographs, the hard copies of photographs, and not just in the phone. And you know, you don't want your children to feel uncomfortable, but you don't want to be left out either. And so it can be quite complicated. I generally, as a principal, I try to keep people out of court. I try to help people make agreements.
Well, before we go to that, why don't we talk about what is the difference between getting a divorce and mediation? I would think the mediation would come first.
It's not a difference.
It's not a difference?
It's like apples and oranges. So a divorce is the ending, the termination of a legal relationship, marriage. There's different ways of going about that. And mediation is a process of helping people reach agreements so that, as I like to say, a stranger sitting on a throne in a black dress, meaning the judge, makes decisions for you. It's better if you can make decisions yourselves. And so I try through mediation. It's a process where I don't advocate for either party. I'm a neutral, but I don't make any decisions. They make all of the decisions. I can give them information. I can help them decide what to do based on what the law is or what will work better for them in their lives. But mediation is just one process. And there's actually 3 processes that you can use to get divorced. And one is mediation, which I think is very good. Sometimes people feel like they need an advocate, though. They need somebody to tell them what the law is, maybe strategize, maybe suggest one thing or another. And so collaborative law is another process. Collaborative law is where both parties are represented by their own attorneys. They each have their own attorneys, but they make an agreement. The attorneys and the parties make an agreement at the beginning. They sign their name to something and it says, we will not go to court. If we go to court, both parties have to get new attorneys because these attorneys will not go to court.
That's interesting.
It's a negotiation process, much like mediation, but where you have a person on your side, somebody to advise you and somebody to guide you. They're not neutral, like a mediator is neutral. And what you often do, and especially with these people who are later in life getting divorces, they sometimes choose to have a neutral financial expert. So it might be a CPA, it might be a financial planner, whoever they choose. And that person acts as a neutral on behalf of both parties and gives them the information and what are capital gains and what will happen if this and what will happen if that. And so both parties trust the same person to give them financial information and perhaps advice.
Now that become very expensive.
It can, but it can also be less expensive than full-blown litigation.
Okay.
And it's also perhaps less expensive if you have a mediator and then you both have attorneys that you go to for advice and reviewing the agreement and, perhaps negotiating changes.
Now, when people start this process, do they ever change their mind as they go into this process and decide that maybe this isn't financially or emotionally what they want to do?
Well, so I don't know if you're speaking about mediation or collaborative law, but I'll answer both.
Okay.
So in mediation, I've had very few, I could probably count on one hand, how many people decided to stop the mediation or at least get attorneys and go to court. Now, you can still use mediators along the way for other matters that you don't need to go to court for, but generally people who are amenable to going to mediation will stick with it, generally. For collaborative, it's a little more adversarial because you each have attorneys on your side and on the other. So that sometimes that goes into litigation also. But for the most part, people who choose collaborative law or mediation will stick with it for the most part.
Okay, very interesting. That's very
Then, of course, the third way of going about it is litigation.
Litigation.
Filing papers, going to court, having hearings, having the stranger in the black dress on the throne making decisions for you. But sometimes you need to go to court. Sometimes one of the parties needs to hear it from a judge. They're not going to believe the other spouse. They're not sometimes even going to believe their attorneys. They need to hear it from a judge. And so that's what the courts are there for, to help people get past an impasse where they're stuck.
So it's very, I mean, I know what it's like to get divorced. It's very emotional. But I would think if I had, well, I'm in a very long-term relationship right now, okay? it would be even more because the emotions that are in it.
Yeah,
It's just, I just can't even describe that. But right now, we need to take a break.
Oh, okay.
Okay?
Sure.
It's time for us to hear from our sponsors, and I'm going to be back with Kathy, and we're going to continue our conversation, and we'll be back in just a couple of minutes. Thank you.
Benefits for you too Insurance Services. We believe knowledge is power when it comes to selecting the correct healthcare and Medicare insurance. Please contact us at healthcareoptions@benefitsforyou2.com or call us at 310-245-0332.
Hi, welcome back to a Senior Citizens Forum, and I'm Janice Wood, and I'm here with my guest, Kathy Neumann, and we've been talking about, getting divorced over the age of 65, which is, it's the same process as if you were under the age of 65, and it still has the same emotional attachments to it. But now we're going to continue on, and we're going to talk about, what are the financial consequences? I mean, I think if you were over the age of 65, the difference of being, say, 30 and getting divorced, you're not going to have the same finances. Maybe you have children that you have to support when you're younger, and it has a different set of circumstances. But now you've got retirements. Now you have money saved. You have, maybe you're living in a house that you own, that you bought together, okay? So, and then you have to deal with your emotions of having this. Maybe one party doesn't want a divorce and the other one does. If both do, you're probably better off, okay? Yeah. Or if one is totally hurt.
yes.
And I think that's where you're shaking your head. The hurt from the one that doesn't want the divorce.
Well, I think also just even if both parties want the divorce, oftentimes it's because they're both hurt. And people get hurt when they're disappointed. So the dreams and the hopes that they had when they got married, or even that they had 10 years earlier, maybe they didn't pan out the way they had hoped that they would, and they're disappointed and hurt and angry.
And maybe retirement didn't work out for them. It worked while they were working.
It's funny that you say that, because I've had more than one. I've had actually several people say, I signed up for Forever After, but I didn't sign up for 24/7. And so sometimes when people do get, go to the retirement stage of their lives, they're just around each other too much.
Yeah.
The break when one or the other or both went to work was really good. They'd have things to talk about at the end of the day. They'd have things to discuss, or maybe even ask for opinions about things. But those things don't exist anymore if people aren't going to work.
Okay.
And yes, you're absolutely right, Janice. When people get divorced when they're older, they already have a set pie.
Yeah.
And now they have to, instead of adding to that pie, they're now cutting it in half, which may leave neither party financially stable or secure. And so, when you're younger and you get divorced, you might have fear about the unknown. You have fear about, what's my life going to be? How am I going to this or that? But when you're older and you're going to have to live on less income and maybe not live in your family home, it's just a whole lot of more fear and different fear.
Oh, I would think it's absolutely, because I know for my father, he gave my mother everything.
Well, I had a case recently where the wife was still working as I believe she was an administrator of a law firm, and the husband had retired. He had been a civil servant, and he retired, and he was home, and he was handyman around the house and and he loved his home, and he loved being home. Mm-hmm. But she wanted the home, and she bought him out, and then he had to think about he was very concerned. Where do I live? Where do I go? And he went down to, I can't remember the name of the area in Orange County. It's a forest.
Oh, and Laguna,
Lake Forest?
Laguna Hills. Oh,
Yes.
there is Lake Forest also.
Yes.
But there is the Laguna.
Yes,
Hills.
and then he also looked up
Yeah.
in Camarillo,
Right.
where I believe your mother lived, right?
Yeah, right.
And there's different retirement communities, as we all know. And so he had to think about, do I want to live in a retirement community? If I do, which one? And he had to go and look at them. And it's just a whole new area of discovery and uncertainty and new decisions that have to be made. And especially as we get older, we're used to our routines and we're used to what's familiar. And what I tried to, sometimes as a lawyer, you don't just give legal advice. Sometimes you're called upon to give life advice. And I suggested to him that it was probably a healthy and exciting thing for him to have a whole new opportunity to be happy, because both people deserve to be happy. If he was just plodding along and not really growing and not really excited about his life, maybe this is a new opportunity for him to become engaged and involved and maybe even get new interests and meet new people and maybe have a romance. All the maybes that you don't have when you're in a stable relationship, even if it's unhappy.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, there's so many maybes out there. Yeah. Just like when you're younger, there's a lot of maybes and the uncertainty and the insecurity. But I know, I watched my mother go through it. She's the one who got the house, okay? But it was like, I'm embarrassed. Then there was the feeling of, well, what can I do to get the marriage back together? And that wasn't going to happen.
Almost always, I ask a potential client who calls me for advice or representation, is there any chance that any amount of time or counseling, therapy might help mend the problem in the relationship? And more often than not, by the time they call me, it's too late.
It's too late.
And it may have been too late years ago, and nobody just did anything about it.
Yeah.
But I do encourage people to take a risk, go to a new organization, go to a new event or a new activity, because that's going to start helping them get excited about their life again.
Yeah.
And it's going to be different.
It is. It's a whole different life. Then I saw my father go off, and he had to find where he wanted to go, but he did what he wanted to do. So that was what the amazing part. And nobody bothered him about what he wanted to do. And he had that romance that you're talking about, okay? And he lived 7 years after they were divorced. And it was like, he was so happy for 7 years. And
I understand the embarrassment that your mom felt, and a lot of people do, whether it's the woman who wants the divorce and the man feels embarrassed, or vice versa. That does happen. And also what happens, and I encourage my clients to resist this temptation, but often what happens is, you're all maybe familiar with that scene in West Side Story where the Jets and the Sharks are at the dance together, and then the music stops, and then all the Jets go to one side and all the Sharks go to the other. And that's kind of what happens in a marriage. All of the women's friends, and this is stereotypical, but there's a reason why it's a stereotype.
Yeah.
All the women tend to go, or all the women's friends go with on the women's side, and you should do this, and you tell your lawyer to get that, and there's all this kind of anger, and the husband side of the family and friends do the same thing, and they can make the situation so much worse than just leaving it alone and staying out of it. A lot of people have the need to talk about it and to blame the other side, and I just would encourage people to resist that temptation, or find a professional, a therapist, to do all of that with, instead of talking to your friends or your family.
Well, especially your adult children.
Absolutely right. Especially your adult children.
Especially your adult children. I mean, not even your smaller children, but your adult children. And I mean, my brother and I think about it now, we did our best to stay out of it. And my father kept us out of it. My mother wanted to bring us into it.
Yeah.
And we set, as the adult children, we set the boundaries.
That's very good. That's very good that you recognized it. Some people don't, and
Yeah.
and it's also difficult because you don't want the person who feels the sad part
Right.
or the embarrassment. You don't want them to feel betrayed on top of it.
Right.
So it's a dance. It's a balancing.
It was
yeah.
a very balanced thing. And until my father died, my brother and I never saw the divorce decree. And afterwards, we did see it. And that's where we knew he was, in Yiddish, there's the terminology, a mensch, in going through the divorce. Yes, he asked for the divorce, but he still gave my mother more than.
Well, and this is what happens oftentimes in mediation or even in just negotiation. When I work for a client, it's their life, it's their decision. It's their decision to give away more than they need to, or to waive a right. They need to know what that right is. They need to know what they're entitled to. But they're also, if they want to give something away like your dad did, fine.
That's fine. And he never said anything, but she would say, well, I need to get more from your father. There'll be the constantness of it.
Yeah.
And I would say, what have I told you?
Yeah.
Please don't do this.
Yeah. Well, again, if somebody's rejected,
It's
an embarrassment, and they want to feel somehow redeemed, or not seen. A lot of times, people feel like there's no amount of money and there's no amount of things that's going to make up for this embarrassment and this new stage in life that she didn't want.
Yeah, that she didn't want, but it was like my constantly saying, okay, I don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
And then after he passed away, she would drive down the freeway and to see where he's at. And she would say, well, if you would have stayed married to me, you would be going to your grandchildren instead of being where you're at. And I would say, I don't want to hear this. I really don't want to hear this.
Yeah. You know, everybody's a vessel, right? We all have our emotions. And
Yeah,
some
but
people have a small vessel and that overflows. And it sounds like your mom, she just overflowed.
She overflowed, but I'm still dealing with the emotions of losing my father.
Yeah.
And she's dealing with her emotions, whatever it was, and I don't want to hear it. And then my brother would say the same thing. So my brother and I had a united front when it came to that.
That was very good.
Yeah. So, but it is hard. Divorce, no matter at what age, is really hard.
What's also hard is the jockeying, if you will, of who gets to go to a grandchild's event. And that's why, Leon and I decided, your husband, for the audience, we decided a long time, when the kids were very little, that we weren't going to do that. We were going to be focused on the kids, and it's worked out.
Oh, I think you guys are beautiful. And
Thank you.
The best thing I love is that when Leon and I got married, and she's going to have a big smile on this, okay, we went to Hawaii, and we went out to lunch with wife number one for him.
Who is a dear friend of mine.
Who is a dear friend. And it's crazy when Leah and I first started dating, there's one night we went out, and it was Leon and his wife number one, wife number two, and the new girlfriend. And it was great.
Well, it's a choice. And pardon me. People can make a choice to hold on to old feelings or to make way for new ones. And so we decided to be child-focused and family-focused. Family-focused. And it's worked out. So as Janice will tell you, we all spend holidays together and happy events and sometimes trips, and it's a great way to go. So if it's possible, if you're going through a divorce or thinking about it, and if you can let go of some of those old feelings, it's baggage.
It's right.
Get rid of it.
And I know with my second husband, with my second child, who happens to live real close to here, there are times he and I are together. But it's not the same relationship that you have. But we can be in the same place at the same time. And when our son, who lives in another country, comes to town, we're able to be in the same place at the same time. And it makes a real difference in how things are. But we still don't have that same thing that you and Leon. I look at you and Leon being more like a brother and sister, because I always really appreciate how you talk to each other and how you communicate together. And if you can build that type of thing, it's really, really important.
Leon and I had a friendship before we got married.
Yeah.
And so that was our primary relationship.
Okay.
And so we were very good at being friends. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Well, right now I have to bring in Arash, who is going to talk about how to beat scamming and hacking, and we'll be back in just a couple of minutes. Thank you. Arash,
Thank you for having me again.
we started talking about passwords last week, so let's talk more about them in detail, okay?
Sure.
Because I was talking and saying I have some sites that I go into because I deal a lot with insurance companies and things, and I see that they're growing.
Right.
I have one insurance company that you're not allowed to use any word in any dictionary,
Yep.
and I'm always trying to come up with stuff, and every 6 weeks it has to be changed.
Changed, correct. That is correct.
And sometimes it becomes overwhelming.
That is true. It's going to be very hard. So technically, that's why we talked about password management. I don't want to
Right.
promote any of them, but I use LastPass. There are Keeper, 1Password, Google. All those have the password management. And if you ask the password management to create a password for you, those app will create a new password with letter, symbol, and all those combinations, and they're not in the dictionary. And as you said, it's going to be longer and longer. So it's going to be 10 to 12 characters right now, maybe 15 for some, it's like for
Right.
insurance companies, bank accounts, sometimes they want it more.
And these different places all want different things.
Definitely. What you brought is a very good subject last week. Bank account, if you want to generate a password, if you put your first name or last name in your password, they won't allow you. They recognize that.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, they recognize that. They won't allow you. If you put your birthday, they won't allow you as well. So they want you to create something that's not very common with you. We were talking about pattern for password last time, which is very good. So if you have a pattern that if you only know, for example, employee ID, some address of your childhood, something that you only know that, and then you just combine it together, that's a good idea as well. But now we talked about password. We briefly talked about what if something happened to me tomorrow. But we know trust and will were there for a long time. I think it's time to have a system for your passwords, for the loved ones, for the immediate family.
I'm absolutely.
Exactly, because if something happened to me, most of our things that we have, especially the younger generation, everything is online. They don't have any document on paper. There's paperless. So to access those digital items, you need a system. Your banks, stocks, crypto, houses, everything. Will, trust, everyone, lots of people I know, including me, keep them in a safe cloud storage. So if something happened to me and my wife or my kids don't have access, my parents, brother, whoever, sister, whoever is supposed to have access, don't have anything about it, it's going to be a very hard time. It's like we have a house and no one has the key except us. So it's very hard for them. They have to break the door. They have to do many things. Sometimes they can get into some safe boxes. Sometimes they can't. So it's better to just write some instruction about what we have for the loved ones. This is the way that you can access. This is our, for example, stocks in this account. This is our bank accounts. These are
So
bank
if you have a
transactions.
will and trust, I would be keeping that information with the will and trust.
That's a great idea, but some stuff you cannot put it on your will and trust
Right.
yet. But you can have a system. For example, as you said, you can have a notebook that you put it on a safe box with instructions. Or you can have a password management with instruction that share with your immediate family,
Yeah.
whoever you want to share.
So that means I know for me, when I go into my computer, I got to go into have a password to even get into
That's
my
exactly.
computer.
So someone needs
So
to have
somebody
that.
needs to have that in order to.
And then that needs to be very
access.
secure. One quick thing about passwords that we talked about, I just want to jump to it. Do not save your passwords on Google Chrome or Edge. I've been repeating this many times because that's very easy to hack. Use a password management system. Google has its own password management, but if you save it on Chrome, as soon as someone finds your computer password, they can easily get those passwords exported from Chrome or Edge. Or Safari is a different story. Apple is different.
Apple is different, but you just have to be protective of those passwords. But make sure somebody that you trust, or two people that you trust, in case something happens to them, know how to get to those passwords so they can take care of your personal business.
Very true.
Thank you, Arash.
My pleasure.
We'll see you next week.
sure. Thank you.
Okay. Bye. Thank you, Arash. That's always interesting. I always like to hear, you know how much I hate scamming and the hacking. So we'll see you back next week with more of your wonderful tips. Now, Kathy, let's go on back to what we were talking about. We were talking about mediation, 3 types of ways that you could go besides divorce, the collaboration we talked about. We've talked a lot about the financial. We've talked about the emotional for people that are 65 and older. And that's same thing for younger. I don't want to diminish that for anyone.
Same thing, only different.
only different. Okay. We've talked about the adult children. Okay. But one of the things that we were talking about at the break earlier was, what if you got married again after the age of 65? Okay, and
Well,
what would you recommend?
Well, for people who get married over the age of 65, who have been married before, or who have children from relationships from before, I encourage people to look into getting a premarital agreement. And the reason is because the law is fairly cut and dried, black letter law. What you owned before marriage is your separate property. What you acquire after the date of separation, if you were to separate, is your separate property. But that period of time in the middle between your date of marriage and your date of separation, what you acquire is presumed to be community property.
Now, I have something I want to bring in.
Okay.
We're in California, so you're talking about California
That's right.
law. Okay?
That's right.
For our listeners that are listening to us, they could be in another state, they can even be in another country, because we're seen in all the different states, and this show is also seen in other countries. So you need to know what the laws are for your particular state within the United States, or the territories, or which country that you're living in.
That's right. I'm talking about California community property and California family code. So those are the laws and the statutes and the case law that applies in divorces in California. But every jurisdiction, every area has their own rules. So you're absolutely right about that. But I was just speaking to somebody earlier today about a possible premarital agreement. It's pretty clear what he has now before they get married is his separate property. But in California and in other jurisdictions that have the similar types of laws, if you use money that's earned during marriage, that's community or communal or joint property income. If you use that to pay for or improve a separate property, a rental property or a family residence, the community, meaning the couple, can buy into that property. So it's still separate property, but they acquire an interest in the separate property of one of the spouses. So you want to make sure that if that isn't your intention, that that happens. I also, in my premarital agreements for older people, I include either a life estate or an estate for a period of time, so that if the person who owns the house passes away, the surviving spouse has the right to remain there for 3 months, 6 months, a year, forever, their lifetime, whatever they want, as long as they pay for the expenses relating to that property. Because especially for people who have been married a long time, even if you're 65, they could still be married 20, 25 years, right?
Oh,
and you don't
yeah.
want to have to immediately like, oh, my spouse died and I'm heartbroken and I have to leave. You know? So I usually include that. If both parties want, I include that in the
Right.
premarital agreement.
I think that's a good idea, even if you're not divorced and you're a widow or widower, that's still a good thing that you should have done as a premarital agreement.
Right, or you can also have that in your estate plan. So
Right.
that's one area that the
plan.
estate planning and premarital agreement kind of blend into each other.
Sure.
But it really is an estate planning issue. But it's also included in some premarital agreements that I prepare. Yeah.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, especially for older people.
So if you're getting divorced, you need a good lawyer. We're going to have Kathy's information posted and how you can find her. And of course, there's always information on how you can find me and Arash. So thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you, Kathy, so much for coming on and being my guest. This has been so much fun.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I've really enjoyed it.
This is a lot of fun, and I hope you all have a wonderful week. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.